Hey gamers, welcome back to another Tournament After Action Report with me, your host, Joshua Joshi Howard. Today we're going to be talking about the most recent RTT I went to over this last weekend at Squad Marks location in Cypress, California, hosted by the Githammer lads, and it was a great event yet again. Before I go any further, I do want to give a couple of quick shoutouts. Thank you once again to Squad Marks. The location that was hosting the event. They sell great terrain. They have good things that you can put on your little bases to help differentiate guys, and they have a fantastic location. So if you're living in the greater Los Angeles area, especially in Orange County, make sure you go ahead and check them out. I will include a link to their website and their Discord down below. I also want to give a shout out to Githammer, once again, the team that I played with at the most recent event for the California Team Championships, as well as the host for this event, Michael Humphrey. I know him as Orc Michael, but I definitely know that he's been hosting a couple of great events. This is the second one that they have hosted this location that I have gone to, and I've really enjoyed it every time that I've gone. He got Costco pizza for everyone, helped run everything, and even though he might have been out at a concert the night before, was still there bright and early to make sure everything was running smoothly. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the lay of the land. This was yet another RTT that I've gone to, meaning it was 3 rounds in 1 day of play. Now, the one thing I do have to say, and Michael, I know you watch these videos, don't make me drive out to Orange County at 8 in the morning. I know that I had to wake up at 6:30 in order to make it there on time, and one of the other players that I ended up playing against was driving from San Diego, so that's partly his own fault that he had to wake up as early as he did, but oh man, 8 o'clock start time is brutal. But one of the important things is, as not quite as I was expecting. Not all of the events in the greater LA area are switching over to the Games Workshop terrain. And that surprised me a little bit. I was kind of expecting more switching to happen. Instead, we're continuing to do this on player placed terrain, meaning that Stormswords and Super Heavies are still very good. Uh, Everybody had a couple of ruins, 3 different ruins, as well as some crates, and crucially 2 woods pieces that also counted as obscuring. So they had all the same rules where if you were not in them, you could not see through them. The obscuring woods are really interesting. I don't have a strong opinion one way or the another, but they do have a big impact on the way the game is played. It does mean that there are more places to hide your guys, but they are still very restrictive on where you can hide them. So they end up breaking up a lot of line of sight, and one of the nice or maybe not nice things that some people have used is you can take these woods and put them along the edges of the board because they do not require being 4 inches away from the board edge. And what that means is you can absolutely set yourself up for better rapid ingresses than you normally would be able to. And it didn't really come into play in any of my games this last weekend, but it is something that I am going to be keeping in mind because I am looking for ways to change up my list going forward. What about the other players? It is worth noting that the ITC ranking did update recently, so the 2024 IT season is live. However, it's so early in the season that it kind of means very little. Most of what it tells you is how many events have players gone to. So I will throw it up on screen here just so you can kind of take a look at it, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot. Mostly what I'm using it for is I do use it to try and figure out what factions people are likely to play, and it'll help inform me as to what version of list I want to bring. Are there any tech pieces I want to bring into different armies or not? Looking at this one, some of the other stronger players were bringing Space Marines, Chaos Space Marines, and a couple of variations of Knights, which meant that I didn't really need to do any real tech with my list, and I ended up being a little bit boring and bringing the same list as I did to the California Team Championships because early in the ITC season, my goal is to get 1,000 ITC points. Even though it's not the most important metric in the world, it is something that it would make me feel good about myself, and it's a very easy benchmark to say, yes, I did it, or no, I did not, and that's why I'm using it as one of my goals for the 2024 year 40K. So with all that in mind, let's go ahead and start talking about the list that I have taken. Now, I'm going to almost entirely skip this. I'm just going to say everything that I've brought because if you've watched any of my last 4 videos, it is the exact same list that I took to all of these events, including the California Team Championships. So once again, I have taken the army list that I have titled Beat That Boy with a Bat, including Gaunt's Ghosts, Lord Solar Leontis, Ironhand Straken, Platoon Command Squad with a Mortar, Regimental Enginseer, Catachan Jungle Fighters, 1 unit of 20 of them, 1 unit of 10 Infantry Squad, including a Heavy Weapons team, which was a Mortar, 3 units of 6 Bullgryn, all with the invulnerable saves and the Bullgryn Mauls. 3 units of Kasrkin. Now, I'm one of the few people who do something different with my Kasrkin ever so slightly. I will bring 2 units of double Melta, double Plasma, and 1 unit of double Plasma, double Volley Gun. I really like the extra Volley Guns because 1, it helps me clear off chaff off of scoring objectives, and 2, this unit becomes really, really good at hunting low knobs. Most low knob characters do not have a lot of wounds, do not have particularly high toughness, and so it does mean that you can just show up and take down a low knob character. After that, I also had 1 unit of 5 Tempesta Scions, a Cyclops Demolition Vehicle, a Stormsword, which I am still bringing, and this is partly because I was feeling kind of lazy. I didn't really want to come up with a new list to play up against everything, and I knew how to pilot this one. I'm trying to do well in these early RTTs so I can relax a little bit more towards the end of the season, and then a Callidus Assassin as well. As I touched on, this is the same list as what I brought to California Team Championships and a couple of events before that. The theory behind this is the same. I'm going to be stat checking people. There's not a lot of tricks in my list. One of the big things is Bullgryn moving 9 with the move order, Kasrkin moving 9, and then having the melt to mine. Like, those are really the big tricks. And I'm going to play a 2,400 point army against you because every time you kill a Kasrkin, it's coming back with the reinforcements. And my goal is to do that 3, 4, sometimes even 5 times a game with all of these different units. So let's go ahead and talk about the games that we played in this one. Feel like this video might be a little bit shorter than my other ones because the games did not go very long. Just like what we did at California Team Championships, there were a couple blowouts in this one. So the first one that I ended up playing up against was against Brennan and his Chaos Knights. Brennan was a great guy. Really enjoyed playing against him. Just was there to have a good time, and it was reflected in his list. The list that he brought was named Dog Allergy. He ended up bringing a Knight Abominant, which was his warlord. He brought a Knight Desecrator, Knight Rampager, a Wardog Brigand, a Wardog Carnivore, 1 unit of Blue Horrors, Kairos Fate Weaver, and 2 units of 3 Nurglings each. And that's it. That was the whole list. That's 1990 points. So you end up having 3 Big Knights, War Dogs, and then a couple of Nurglings, and Kairos. Right, that's the entire list. It's just 4 big things and a couple slightly smaller things, right? It's just a really cool list. It's not super competitive, and he admitted that straight up, but it is a lot of fun, and it was a very cool list to see. Now, one of the things that was worth noting about this event is we did know the mission pack beforehand, which doesn't happen for a lot of RTTs. Normally you show up, and sometimes the TA will roll a die and see like, hey, this is your mission for this next one. The first mission that we played was Mission B. Priority targets, hidden supplies, and search and destroy. And this mission, I am 4-0 in so far in tournament. It is a very good mission for guard because we have the reinforcement stratagem, we bring things back, and it means that most of the time we're going to have more things at the end of the game than you will. And so we are virtually guaranteed a 25 primary point turn 5, which is ridiculous. The fact that we get half of our primary on the last turn of the game, virtually guaranteed, is very, very good. So the only real way to stop the guard is to try and table us. And especially considering on this mission that Brennan was only playing a handful of things, if he lost those things, he was not going to be able to hold primary very well throughout the course of the game. And unfortunately, this army really, really struggles to do a lot of tactical objectives because you do not want any of your big guys doing actions. That's their entire turn, and when you only have like 4 things that'll do real damage, you need every single one of them to be active for every turn. For this mission, as is not really a surprise for Guard versus Knights, we end up going with fixed objectives, taking Bring It Down and Deploy Teleport Homers. And one of the nice things about Deploy Teleport Homers, especially on player plays terrain, is you can nearly guarantee that you will have a ruin within 6 inches of the center that you can safely not only be on an objective because it's hidden supplies, but also be within 6 inches of the center so you can safely deploy teleport homers. It's really important that there are teleport homers in that building because, guys, Terminators are dumb. If they don't have 5 teleport homers in the same place, they will not know where to teleport. Of course, though, Brennan ended up taking tactical objectives, 1 for the CP, and 2 because, you know, I don't give up anything good. You can try and take Assassination against my army, but there is not a great second fixed secondary to take in general, especially with this army because you do not have the guys to do actions. But it starts off, I do my normal deployment, I set up a bunch of guys, I have my Kasrkin set up such that they can scout themselves into safety on turn 1, and especially since we're going into Knights, just hiding on the other side of the wall, very, very nice. And he ended up deploying all 3 knights on the board. He had one behind the the terrain in his home objective. He put all of the blue horrors on his home objective, and then the Rampager and the the Desecrator was hiding. The Rampager and I believe the Despoiler were the ones that were set up kind of on the line, but they were both in a position where it was a little bit hard to draw a line of sight to them. However, when we rolled for first turn, the guard ended up going first, and that is a brutal position to be. So, on my first turn, as you can kind of see on the first photo, it's not the same knight, but there was a knight basically behind that brown woods. It kind of looks like a crater just north of the center left or center west objective. There was a knight there. And when there is a knight there, it is too big to completely hide from my Stormsword, which is basically deployed where you can kind of see it. It can either back up towards the west and draw a line of sight, or it can go a little bit towards the east and also draw a line of sight there. And I unload everything from my Stormsword into that knight. And as I do so, and then my Kasrkin move out, and I put 18 Bullgryn in the middle of the board. Anyway, as I move out and shoot, of course, Brennan uses not rotate ion shields. I think it's called demonic bulwark, but it turns your 5-up invul in shooting to a 4-up invul in shooting. And when he puts it out, I throw out all my shots and I roll a 6 on the number of shots, which is pretty good. It means I'm shooting him 12 times. Then hitting him on 3s, I think I get like 9. I was slightly above average. Then I roll to wound and I get 7 wounds through, meaning that he has 7 4-up saves to make. And Brennan feels pretty good about this. As he rolls his dice, he ends up saving 5 of the 7 wounds, meaning that only 2 of them go through. At that point, we're both thinking, okay, fine. All right, the knight is probably going to live. It's probably going to be bracketed, but it should live from this position. And then I go and roll my 2 dice, and I roll boxcars for d6 plus 2, meaning I just did 16 damage on 2 attacks. And that brings the knight down from 22 wounds to 6. And so, with one of his knights sitting on only a couple of wounds, I know what I need to do. It is down to 6 after the las cannon. And I have Straken and all of his Catachan ready to go. They charge in to the knight. And they just need to do... they throw a grenade. They do 3. And it leaves the knight on 3 wounds. Straken runs forward by himself, and crucially, because he is leading a unit and because he got a charge off, he is hitting on 2s with lethal hits, re-rolling, and then he is strength 7 on the charge because he gets the Catachan special roll. So he is winning on 5s, but crucially also re-rolling. Also, he's AP 3 on the charge because of the Catachan roll. Also, knights don't have access to the invulnerable save in melee. So that means every wound that Straken gets through means that Brennan would be saving that one on a 6. So Straken is able to charge in. They go through, and he single-handedly swings through, gets 3 wounds through, and Brennan doesn't save any of them, meaning that the Colossal Knight falls to Colonel Ironhand Straken all by himself, definitely not with any help from the Stormsword, takes it down, and they're also able to consolidate into the Knight or the Wardog Brigand. And they're also able to consolidate immediately after that into the Wardog Carnivore, meaning that it will not be nearly as effective on his next turn either. And that kind of set the tone for the game right away. If you guys remember the last time I went to a Squad Marks event, I played against 2 different knight players, Josh and Tomas. And against Tomas, I also killed a knight of his on turn 1, and it exploded and did damage to one of the armigers that was standing next to it. But Brennan lost nearly a quarter of his army before he had a chance to do anything. So that means I got 5 points on Bring It Down. I was able to deploy a Homer very safely in the middle of the board. On Brennan's turn, he ends up drawing Extend Battle Lines and Overwhelming Force. Now, Extend Battle Lines, very easy to do in general. Even though I had put, I think I only put 12 Bullgryn in the middle because I put 1 unit of Bullgryn to deploy a Homer in the very important ruin just west of the center. It is very, very tough to kill Bullgryn, just in general, right? they are so stupidly tanky for 160 points that even though he put all of his fire, ended up charging moving out a Rampager and using the Laser Destroyer, the Desecrator, and a little bit of auxiliary fire from, I believe it was a Brigand, I end up having Bullgryn survive on the No Man's Land objective, and he ends up getting a 0 on overwhelming force. He does manage to extend his battle lines. I don't remember which one he was controlling the middle, but it's not hard to take objectives from Bullgryn, just because he does have, OC 8 on his War Dogs, and so they were able to take the one, I believe it was the center east objective. But anyway, comes out, he's swinging, he's got the 5 points to himself. And then comes the only time in the game where I am worried that I might not win the game. Because on my turn 2, he has brought his Rampager forward. And I take my Stormsword. It moves from the, one side of the southwest ruin, protecting my home objective, and it moves east and draws on a fire on the Rampager. And then it opens fire. And I don't remember what my hit roll was, or number of shots I rolled was, but I know that I had 9 shots that I needed to wound with. And I rolled to wound, and I convert on a 3-up, I convert 3 of them. Such that when he rolls, I think he saves 2, so I only get 1 shot through, and I do okay damage with it. I think I do like 5 or 6. The las cannons don't do a whole lot more. I think I end up doing a total of 10 wounds to the Rampager on my second turn. And one of the important things about knights in general is they get to walk over, or the actual knights, not the little knights, they get to walk over any piece of terrain that is less than 4 inches, and also just over enemy units just for free, right? That is just kind of how they work. And if that wasn't enough of a problem, they also have access to Knights of Shade, which means that they can walk through any building in any unit as though it was not there for a single CP. And the Rampager can also advance and charge. But one of the things that I totally, I promise I remembered it in the moment, I definitely did not, is that the Rampager does not have access to fallback and charge. So what I ended up doing is I charged the Bullgryn in my mind, initially thinking, hey, as long as I get some damage in first, if I get the first swings, maybe I'll take less damage when it swings back, because maybe the Bullgryn will bracket it. They don't. But anyway, I end up charging them in, and he kills like 3 of them on the swing back. But at that point, we're like, oh, wait. This move was definitely smarter than I thought it was, because he can't fall back and charge. And we had a question about whether Knights of Shade allowed him to fall back and charge, because he can move as though units weren't there. But we did come to the agreement that no, because you were still in engagement range. And I'm actually curious if there's like an actual ruling to it. That is what we understood it to be. But if you have a different understanding, please let us know, because it definitely would have changed the game if he could have done that. But either way, with the Rampager now tied up in the middle objective, one of his knights already dead, I got ever so slightly worried, but I was able to deploy teleport homers on his side of the board by dropping in Scions. On Brennan's turn 2, he ends up drawing behind enemy lines and investigate signals. Now, investigate signals, perfect. That's what the Nurglings are for. He drops them in the southeast corner, the northwest corner. Great. Behind enemy lines, though, he takes his Rampager and chooses to fall it back over my Bullgryn. And he can do that without doing a desperate escape because he's not battle shocked. And of course, he is also able to just walk over my guys because he's a knight. So he does end up getting 3 points on behind enemy lines and 4 points on investigate signals. But he's he's still in a spot where I am just going to rip him apart. I'm going to do a ton of damage to him on my next turn. And ultimately, on my turn 3, the game basically falls apart. Because now, my Stormsword is able to pull line of sight on basically everything that it wants. It puts, on turn 3, it puts all of its big guns into the Knight Rampager that is hanging out on my side of the board. And it puts all of its bolters into the War Dog Carnivore that is sitting in the center. And it single-handedly kills both of them. Nowhere near as interesting as the others, because it already taken a full volley from the Stormsword on turn 2. But at that point, Brennan was sitting with basically nothing on his side of the board. He had Kairos, who was hanging out in the northwest. He got one more knight, and then he had a brigand, which was hanging out on the southeast objective. But the other thing that I did on turn 3 was I brought in a bunch of Catachan to use flamers on the Nurglings in the southeast corner. Did some damage to them, and then they also hit their their 9-inch charge into the brigand on the southeast objective, and that meant that on turn 3, Brennan was scoring no primary. He also drew Area Denial and Storm Hostile Objective. Now, the Storm Hostile was pretty easy for him to do. He took the last remaining knight and he plopped it on the Central East Objective and took that one from all of my Bullgryn because I did not have enough OC to really do anything, and I also didn't really care. I would rather save the CP than use Inspired Command. Because he ended up charging the Carnivore into the Bullgryn on turn 3, he didn't kill enough of them. I still ended up having 3 of them, and that meant that after he came in and swung and did all his swings and killed a couple of Bullgryn, I was able to pile in the remaining Bullgryn such that they were within 3 inches of the center and completely denying him his area denial. And then on turn 4, everything else died. All that he was left with at the bottom of 4 was Kairos and a brigand that was tied up in combat. I had brought in Kasrkin and Scions. They had shot off all the horrors on his home objective, so he wasn't holding his home objective at all. And the only last really interesting thing that happened was he drew Tempting Target. And all that he had left, or I chose the southeast objective, the one his brigand was on. And in my mind, the reason why this was a good plan was that Kairos could not get to it. Yes, he had 8 OC on it, but I had a bunch of Catachan. The brigand was tied up in melee combat with my Kasrkin, so it could not move. It was going to be hitting my guys at a -1. And Kairos, I did not think could get in range to shoot, but he could. I didn't measure it. And he also has a blast weapon, and I had, at this point, still like 15 guys left in the unit. So what he needed to do was he needed to kill the unit down until there were only 3 guys left. And this is where, in my mind, the brilliant idea that I had was we are going to use a stratagem that does not come up very often. We're going to use Go to Ground. That means that our Catachan will have a 6-up invul. And so then Kairos shoots in, does a lot of damage. Leaves 8 guys left on the objective. And then the brigand opens up. And it shoots and it shoots and it shoots. And it ends up leaving me in a spot where I need to make 3 6-up invulnerable saves on 8 dice. So I go ahead, I take my dice, I reserve one of them in case I want to CP reroll it. I roll them. I get 2 of the 3 6s that I need, meaning that if I were to roll one more die and roll a 6 on it, I would hold the objective, or rather I would contest it. I would still have 4 guys for 8 OC at the end of his turn, meaning that he does not capture the tempting target. I go, I'm like, tell Brendan, easiest roll of my life. Roll the die, and it's a 6. I stop the tempting target on turn 4. And that, basically ends the game. I'm in control of basically every objective on the board. I take my Stormsword, I pull it out, I shoot Kairos to death, and I end up scoring I end up effectively maxing because it's so hard to get deploy teleport homers on turn 1 if you go first. But what the end score ended up being on this one was 99 points to Josh and the Astra Militarum, and 61 points to Brennan and his Chaos Knights. And this game was a lot of fun, right? When people are kind of losing, it can be a tough game to play. But Brennan, he was talking about it. He brought a list that he just loved playing. It didn't matter to him if he was going to be winning games or not. And as the dice came through, we were still having a great time. We got to talk about how no Siege is always ruining all the plans coming through in this game, and it was still a fantastic time. And he said, I think it was on turn 4, is like, at this point we're going for moral victories, right? We're trying to find anything that we can in order to find a little bit more opportunities to kill some Bullgryn and actually take down a couple of cool things. But the crucial thing, he never got his Night Rampager into the Stormsword. He never was able to bring the Laser Destructor into the Stormsword in a way that was going to matter. And it was a fairly one-sided game overall that I think might have been a little bit different had he gone first. But he didn't. That's the way the cookie crumbles, and that's the way I end up winning my first game of the day. After that, there was a very long break between game one and game two, because credit again to Michael and the Get Hammer lads providing Costco pizza. Everybody got a couple of slices on that one, but I was really tired. I had to wake up at 6:30, and just for context, I am a complete degenerate. I wake up at the earliest at 11 on days where I get to set my own schedule, and that meant that I was very early. I ended up going to take a nap during lunch because I was like, all right, I'll be back in 30 minutes. I just need to rest my eyes for a little bit, and so I did that. But after that, it was time for game two. And in game two, I ended up playing up against Victor and his Blood Angels. And Victor's the guy that I mentioned who ended up driving all the way from San Diego to Cypress, California. And that is at least like an hour and a half drive, maybe 2 hours. Um, I'm sure the traffic was fairly light because there's, not as much dense population between the two cities, but it is still just very far. So credit to Victor for making the whole drive all the way up. Now, this was my first time playing up against Blood Angels, and we ended up playing this one on Mission C, which is the Ritual, Scrambler Fields, and Sweeping Engagement. And I gotta say, not overly fond of the Ritual in general. I am currently a 50% win rate on the two Ritual missions. I am 2-0 on Mission C, and 0-2 on Mission H. But the thing about the Ritual on Player Place Terrain is it's a game that is very much dominated on how good you can pre-measure things and how effectively you can hide these objectives behind ruins, because it's not that hard to do. You just have to do it. And then you also have to hedge your bets as to how effectively you can both set up these objectives and be able to hide. And it's something that I learned pretty heavily playing in a game up against Jason McKenzie, one of the best local players in the area, head of the Xenos Petting Zoo Club. And, I had some familiarity with the mission. However, I did not have a lot of familiarity with the Blood Angels. And for people who do, let's go ahead and go over Victor's list. Victor brought the Ripping and the Daring, a Blood Angels Sons of Sanguinius force. It included a Captain with Junk Pack, Lamarty's, Sanguinary Priest with Jump Pack, another Sanguinary Priest with Jump Pack, 2 units of 10 Assault Intercessors with Jump Packs, a Ball Predator, 1 unit of 10 Death Company Marines with Jump Packs, and 2 units of 5 Death Company Marines with Jump Packs, 2 Gladiator Lancers, an Infiltrator Squad, 2 Scout Squads, and a Callidus Assassin. Now, like I said, I had not played against it, but one of the things that I did learn very quickly is that they have a lot of good stratagems. There's the 1 CP battle tactic for Lance and Lethal. There's one which allows you to consolidate 6 inches. And there's one that is Armor of Contempt, which of course every Space Marine has access to. And the captain, of course, gives him access to a stratagem on his unit. But it has to be a battle tactic. But like I said, they're very good battle tactics. Now, as we went to deploy for this, one of the crucial things about this deployment was the fact that I could not hide my Storm Surge entirely. As you can see, I probably made a bit of a mistake with the way that I placed all my buildings, because I put them all such that they were on the line. And against an army that was better at shooting than Blood Angels, this would have been a potentially dire mistake. The other big mistake that I made was that the crates that you see on my home objective, I thought were tall enough to hide Lord Solar, but they weren't, meaning that I could not deploy Lord Solar on my home objective. That's part of why you see him so far forward. Luckily, though, on the Ritual, you only score points for no man's land objectives, and I always had enough things that I could move things back to control my home objective if I ever needed to. And because it was Scrambler Fields, you could not drop guys with rapid ingress or anything on objectives. But anyway, one of the big things that ended up happening in this one, as of course Victor kept 2 big units of one death company and one set of assault intercessors with jump packs, all in reserve. And I went first yet again, and this ended up being a fairly big deal. So one of the things that happened is my Stormsword, they're not there now, but my Stormsword, which I deployed here, my whole thought was that if Victor went first, he could not move one of his Lancers to draw line of sight. So with that in mind, my Stormsword should never die on turn 1 unless he rolls incredibly hot and I roll incredibly cold. Because in order to kill it, he would need to roll, if he would need to get everything through, and he would also need to roll a total of 15 on 3d6 in order for him to actually kill the Stormsword in one turn. And that's very, very tough on its own. But either way, I end up going first. And even though he does a decent job, remember this crate that you can kind of see in the middle of the board is obscuring. I cannot see through that. What I could do with my Stormsword was I was able to draw a line of sight to some infiltrators and also one of the 5-man units of Death Company on the far side of the board. And I end up taking my Catachan, and my whole thought process here is if I can sacrifice my Catachan in order to stop his Death Company from getting into Lord Solar and my side of the board, that will be very, very good. But what I ended up doing with a Stormsword is I pointed the 5 twin-linked heavy bolters at the infiltrators, and I pointed the main gun and the las cannons all at the 5-man unit of Death Company. And then I opened fire. And I thought in my mind, surely this Death Company unit is dead. The infiltrators will probably live on a guy. But I was very wrong. The infiltrators end up living with, I believe it's 3 guys after all the shooting. And the Death Company end up living with 2 guys against the main cannon of a Stormsword and 4 las cannons. They end up living because I just end up rolling so poorly on my the number of shots was good, but when I rolled the number or rolled the hit when I'm hitting on 3s, I only got 4 hits through it. Of course, they obviously all wound because they're wounding on 2s, but still. But I end up rolling a 1 on the damage, and he ends up spiking his feel no pain. So the one that only did 3 damage didn't kill a guy. So overall, Victor ends up with more Death Company than I'm expecting, and also more infiltrators than I'm expecting. The other major problem that I had was when I charged my Catachan in, these crates are a little bit more than 3. They're like 3 1/3, 3.5 inches tall, and 3 inches wide. Meaning that when I went to go charge in my Catachan, something I asked later is like, did you intend to do this, or is it just a happy accident? He set it up such that I could not move guys between his base and the crate. And because pile-ins and consolidates are 3 inches, if I have a guy on top, they cannot pile in or consolidate down because it's a little bit more than 3 inches. So I only ended up getting Colonel Straken and a couple Catachan into the other 5-man unit of Death Company, and I had hoped that I would be able to kill them. But I only ended up killing 2 of them, and all of that was Colonel Straken, of course, just slicing and dicing his way through. But that ended up being a bit of a problem for me. I ended up doing a lot less damage to him than I had expected. Now, one of the other big things that I ended up doing on this was because I got engaged on all fronts and overwhelming force. I ended up pitching overwhelming force at the end of the turn. And engaged on all fronts is relatively easy for me to do because, as you can kind of see, I just string out my Kasrkin across deployment zone. I end up taking one of the units of Bullgryn. They move, and they charge their way in because this center ruin just north of the middle objective has scouts in it. And I get that charge off, and I kill 3 of them. I just do a lot less damage than I'm expecting to, and so the scouts are alive, the infiltrators are alive, and both units of Death Company are alive. And I had expected that at least 2 or 3 of those units would be dead. So, on his turn, Victor ends up drawing Capturing the Outpost and Assassination, and luckily for him, I had overextended Colonel Straken. Colonel Straken gets chopped to bits very shortly after this. Capturing the Outpost ends up being a bit of a dead thing, but one of the important things is this big unit of assault intercessors with jump packs that you see just north of the little woods crater thing. They move in, and they charge into the Bullgryn. And one of the important things that we did determine, and again, this is another rules question for anybody, if you guys know for sure, he charged them in, and this unit does mortals on impact in the charge phase. and I believe it's every model within engagement range on a 4-up does immortal. Now, one of the things that we were asking, or rather that I raised the question for, is does, if you can't get, or if you have to have your Blood Angels guys in 2 ranks, obviously, if the front rank is in base to base and the second rank is also in base to base, they all get to swing. But because they're all on 32mm bases, which is wider than an inch, does the second rank get to do mortals? And what we ended up determining is because engagement range is defined as being within an inch, and it is separate from units that are base to base of base to base, they could not. And he ends up doing a couple of mortal wounds to the Bullgryn. And it was actually it ended up being a bigger deal than I think either of us expected. But if you have a different understanding of that role, please let me know down in the comments as well. But anyway, they jump in, they got their chain swords. There's, I think, a power fist in there as well. They're chopping, they're swinging. And I think they have like 50 attacks. And they all come in, and I have like 30 saves to make. Because they're +2 strength, meaning that they're hitting on 3s with rerolls because of Oath of Moment, and maybe just built in. No, those are the Death Company. And then they're winning on 4s. So he ends up getting like 30 wounds through. And at this point, I've got like 12-ish wounds worth of Bullgryns, and I go ahead and I roll my saves. And I roll a lot of saves. I think I save about 2/3 of them. And then I go ahead and roll my Feel No Pains. And I end up surviving this whole fight with 1 Bullgryn on 1 wound after all the special weapons had come through. And that was crazy. It was a huge deal because this was the shield captain unit. If it had wiped the Bullgryn, it could have consolidated into my Kasrkin because they would have become, at least for some of his models, the new closest unit with the free battle tactic. But that didn't happen because the 1 Bullgryn on 1 wound in No Man's Land was able to survive. And that was big. That was very big. That meant that on turn 2, even though I was only controlling the 1 objective that I had spawned in the middle building on my side of the board, it still meant that as the Bullgryn fell back and survived its battle shock, and I don't remember if I had to roll a desperate escape or not, but it survived on 1 wound, I was then able to set up, and my Stormsword, I believe, didn't need to move in order to draw line of sight on the things that it wanted to, which was basically just this 1 unit. I do my movement. I do a couple of things that I think were very important. The first one is I am very aware of the fact that Victor has access to rapid ingress, and because all of these Death Company and Assault Marines with jump packs have access to Deep Strike, I need to be very careful. And so what I end up doing is I end up drawing Investigate Signals, and what I do is I end up dropping Gaunt's Ghosts in the southeast corner in order to investigate signals there. I drop the Callidus in the southwest corner to investigate signals there. I take a Cyclops demo vehicle, which I could not investigate a signal with in either the northwest or the northeast, but I drop it north of Lord Solar on the other side of this left-hand building, such that nothing would be able to deep strike there. Between the Bullgryn that were large in the center of the board, the Bullgryn that were in his center building, and I brought in some Kasrkin along the southern board edge behind my Stormsword in order to make sure that they could do a little bit of bonus fire into the guys that were on the middle objective, onto the Assault Marines that were there. And between all of this, I was able to completely screen out my side of the board, and it meant that the only place that Victor could rapid ingress was 9 inches to the northeast, where my dice tray is currently sitting on the board. And once he dropped them there, I go, this is not good. Because one of the things that we did do is we measured out, we took a laser beam out and said, hey, you can set your guys up here such that they are not shootable by the Stormsword. Now what that ended up meaning is that the Stormsword put all of its fire into the guys in the middle and was able to wipe them. But it also meant that on the next turn, the Death Company, or Assault Marines, yeah, they were led by Lamarty, so I think they were Death Company. We're going to get into my Kasrkin on the eastern side, where I had just put another objective with the Regimental Enginseer, and they were going to die next turn. For cleanse, I ended up cleansing the objective that I had set up on in the middle of the board, and then I also cleansed the objective that the Enginseer dropped because the way I understand it is you can drop the objective with one unit, and then you can cleanse it with a second unit. Other things that happened though was throughout this, I also took my Bullgryn that had charged the scouts in the middle of the board, and he had shot them a little bit with, I believe, the Ball Predator and one of the Lancers, and then I took them and I charged them into the Death Company in the northwest because I really, really needed what he described them as they are his two missiles. He's going to shoot them at the enemy, and even though they're OC0, they're still very, very hard to get rid of, and they punch way above their weight. And so I just sent my Bullgryn out over there, was able to effectively clean them up. I don't remember if I actually killed all of them, but I tied them up for another turn, which was really big. But Victor's turn 2 was where the game broke. A couple important things happen. I have moved up another unit of Bullgryn that they are completely sitting on the objective in the middle of the board. I have one unit of Bullgryn in the northwest that had either finished dealing with or nearly finished dealing with the Death Company. He had a unit of Death Company that were going to charge my Kasrkin in the east. So he took his last unit of Jump Pack Assault Intercessors and put them 9 inches away behind that ruin that I had charged the scouts with my Bullgryn. He put them 9 inches away from my Bullgryn in the center of the board. And then he started shooting. He took his Ball Predator and one of the Lancers that could see, and he started shooting at my Bullgryn in the middle. And there's strength 6 flamers. This on the Ball Flamer, or whatever the special flamer is called. And he shot them into my Bullgryn. And he killed one. And then he shoots with some other piddly guns, and I don't think they do any real damage. Then he says, oh yeah, I need to shoot with my Hunter-Killer missile. And he does. And of course I let him, because like, I haven't made any decisions. Like, yeah, do it. Shoots it, and it gets through the Bullgryn's invul, and it kills another Bullgryn. And that is really, really bad news for Victor, because I was able to pull Bullgryn that were close to him. I was able to pull the ones that were creating the 9-inch screen in the first place. And what we ended up measuring afterwards was, even though he was 9 inches away originally from the guys, because I had taken enough of them out, they were now just over 10 inches out, meaning that it was now a 10-inch charge for him to try and make with his Jump Pack Intercessors. Now, it's really important to note that rolling a 9-inch charge with a reroll is about 50%. It's a little bit worse. I think it's like 48. Hitting a 10-inch charge with a reroll is about 30%. It is significantly worse. It's 20 percentage points worse, nearly. And so, a couple of important things happen. The first one is Victor tries to make the charge with his Jump Pack Intercessors into the Bullgryn in the middle of the board. And he starts off, and he rolls a pair of 2s, so he rolls a 4. That is clearly not enough, regardless of whether or not I have pulled guys. Then he sits there, and he's like, well, if I don't make this charge, the Stormsword is going to kill them, because they're just out in the open. And so, he's like, well, I'm going to CP reroll it. And he rolls a 9. He rolls a 6 and a 3. It's a 9. It would have made it if he hadn't shot my Bullgryn. And that is a game-changing position to be in. The other important thing is he had moved his Death Company, and he moved them in, and he says, I'm going to now charge them into the Kasrkin. And he puts them in such a spot where he rolls a 5. And the rule about charges is, if a model can base, it is required to do so. And because they have jump packs, the 5-inch means that one guy has to come around the wall and still be an inch outside of my Stormsword, but he is able to fit on that spot. Which means that regardless of whether or not his shots go off or he kills the Kasrkin squad, which he should every single time, they are going to be visible to the Stormsword on the next turn without me moving, meaning that I'll be able to do it with lethal hits. And so he goes in, he rolls his attacks, he kills the Kasrkin as I had expected, and then I ask him, do you want to consolidate into the tank? And he's like, yeah, I guess, I might as well make you -1 to hit. And the Stormsword turns around and it drives over a guy and kills one, which is very funny. But, crucially, he's got one unit of Jump Pack Intercessors in the middle of nowhere that are now going to get charged by Bullgryn and also going to get shot at by a Stormsword, and I have reinforcements that I'm going to bring in. And then he's got a unit of Death Company that are tied up with the Stormsword that the Stormsword is now going to put all of its bolters into. And on my turn 3, I do just that. Now, one of the things that does happen is I bring in a lot of reinforcements in the northwest. I bring in the new Catachan, the Gaunt's Ghost drop over there, the Callidus drops over there, and I have a remaining like 4 Bullgryn or something in the unit that had gone to go kill the Death Company. I set them all up over there. Now, I make a similar mistake actually to Victor in this spot because I shoot with the guys in the northwest first. And what that means is I kill enough guys that he pulls his jump pack intercessors out of line of sight of my Stormsword. So the main gun now has nothing to shoot at, which is definitely a mistake on my part. I should have been able to kill more of them and maybe wipe the squad, but either way, Bullgryn ended up charging into them shortly after. So it means that my last cannons and heavy bolters are the only things that the Stormsword is shooting, and it doesn't move, and it shoots everything into the Death Company that he is engaged with. And because it remains stationary, it gets lethal hits. And lethal hits with sustained hits on bolters is really, really good into Death Company. And they go, I roll exceedingly well on my hits with the bolters, and we end up killing every single one of the Death Company except for Lamarty's. And the other important thing is the Bullgryn. I rolled attempting target, and he chose the only no man's land objective that he had on his side, and a couple of important things happened in that engagement as well. I end up cleaning up most of the jump pack intercessors with small arms fire and Bullgryn running on in to beat them with bats. But crucially, I take the other unit of Bullgryn, they charge onto the scouts that are hiding on the no man's land objective that he had set up, and into the ball predator, and hit them, beat them all down, and I kill enough of the scouts that I get 4 OC onto the objective compared to the ball predator's 3. And at this point, the game is basically over. All that Victor has left at this point is a Sanguinary Priest, I think, and Lamarty's, and a couple of vehicles in his back line. And we end up talking it out because I hold him to a 5 primary on turn 2 and a 0 and a 0 on turns 3 and 4, which is a huge difference. And at that point, we basically just say, hey, if there's anything else left you want to roll that's important, we can do it. Otherwise, I'm going to be scoring maximum from here on out. We draw some cards. We figure out what happens. The only thing that I don't score is Capture Me Outpost, but I should have spent a CP to reroll that one, so I probably could have gotten 100 on this game. But either way, as everything goes through, we end up finding a score that we agree upon at 95 points to Josh and his Imperial Guard, and 58 points to Victor and his Blood Angels. Now, again, this was a fun game. One of the things that I could tell Victor was interested in is he clearly wants to get better. He said he's only been playing, at least competitively, for about 3 months. And I can tell that he's got a good head on his shoulders for the game. And one of the things that I asked him about, and it's something I think that everyone who is trying to get better at Warhammer should be able to do, is answer the following question. What is your game plan for this game? If you go first and if you go second. It's really important to be able to answer both of them. And because I initially asked him, like, what's your game plan? And he gave me some very generic answers, which are good answers, right? Like, scouts are going to move block, and they're going to set up, like, objectives here and here, right? But I asked him what his game plan was, especially with relation to the Stormsword, and he was like, I didn't really know. And we ended up talking it out, and I basically said that I think he had 2 real options for how he could play, depending on if he went first or second. Option 1 was just overload one side of the board. His force concentration is so much better than mine that he can just go and try and kill Lord Solar and take my home objective and create pressure that way and sweep from the west to the east. The other way that he could have tried to do was try and set up objectives on his side of the board and force me to come to him. Yes, the Bullgryn will come through to his side of the board, but a couple things about them. They are OC1, and they're not going to be killing that many Marines each time, right? Especially because he's got a lot of access to Feel No Pain. They are just going to struggle. And he can play a bit of a longer game, but I will be asking questions about his side of the board every single time, which is nice. But if he can, that's one way that he can ignore my Stormsword, is he just never comes out to fight it. The other thing I generally said to him was like, yeah, you kind of need to accept that the Gladiator Lancers and the Ball Predator are going to die if the Stormsword sees them. But the way he ended up playing them is he played them so cautiously that they ended up not having real targets to shoot every single turn. And I think that was something that really hurt him, is being overly protective of his own units instead of using them to kill my scoring pieces and trying to find ways to deal with me that way. Because I'm going to win any battle of attrition, so he needs to find some decisive turn where he can remove enough of my army that he is able to take control of things, and that didn't happen. Of course, he could also just hit his charges, which, you know, is a big binary that always happens in Warhammer 40k, but still. We had a good conversation about it. Hopefully that'll help, and hopefully it'll help Victor get better in the near future. And if there's anybody here who hasn't heard that before, hopefully that's something that you can come up with. And that meant, after that one, that we are getting ready for our last game of the day, the finals for this one. I am 2-0. There are a couple other players at this point who I believe were also 2-0. There's actually a really funny thing. Now, I gotta preface this with that the person I played for finals was the captain of mine for California Team Championships, Luis, who was playing Death Guard in the last video. And he's normally also an Astra Militarum Imperial Guard player. And we were joking that if I won, that meant that I was going to assume captainship and he would have to find a new army to play. And so he yelled out to one of the other guys, "Hey Omar, if I lose, do you want to buy my guard army?" Um, but the other thing is, we ended up learning this after game 3, and this definitely mattered. So Luis had played a game with someone else, and apparently they were doing some portion of the rules wrong. I wasn't paying that close attention exactly, but what they ended up determining is that Luis scored 10 points more than he should have, which was exactly the amount of points necessary, or that he won the game by. So they went back retroactively and adjusted his game to score such that instead of a win, it was a draw. So in theory, it changed how the parries were supposed to work kind of across the board, and I was probably not supposed to play Luis, but I ended up doing so anyway. So, ultimately, it ends up being a situation where Luis rolls up with his Imperial Guard, I roll up with my Imperial Guard, and we both take a look at this and go, oh, all right, Luis, I think it's going to be a very, very tough game for you. So, part of the reason why Luis is going to have a really tough time in this game is because his list matches up very poorly into mine. He has Lord Solar Leontis, Ursula Creed, Ironhand Straken. Those are sounding pretty familiar. Oh, I didn't realize he had 2 Cadian Castellans. He had 2 Cadian Castellans? Oh, he was running them with his Kasrkin. Okay, that makes sense. All right, 2 Cadian Castellans, a Death Corps Marshal, a platoon command squad with a mortar, 1 unit of 20 jungle fighters joined by Colonel Straken, 1 unit of 10 Catachan jungle fighters with Lord Solar Squad, 1 unit of 20 Death Corps of Krieg with all the fixins, 2 units of Kasrkin with Melta Plasma, 2 units of 3 Rapier Laser Destroyer batteries, which are just these little push carts which have double twin-linked las cannons on them, which are pretty cool for 105 points. The only difference is that they are AP2 instead of AP3, but you put them on top of a building in your home objective, and suddenly they have line of sight on everything. And plunging fires. They're still AP3 effectively. 2 Rogel Dorns with Stubbers, Multi-Meltas, and Oppressors, and Pulverizers, and then 2 units of 2 Scout Sentinels. It says they have autocannons. Yeah, he likes the autocannon, so they must have been autocannons, and then a Callidus Assassin. Now, the major problem that Luis is going to run into is that he cannot kill the Stormsword. And the Stormsword, every time it looks at a Rogel Dorn, will kill it. So he needs to be very, very careful about how he positions his Rogel Dorns. And meanwhile, in comparison, I can take my Stormsword, plop on the middle objective, and nothing's going to kill it the entire game. Even with Fields of Fire from Creed and the Mortars, and the AP3 and the las cannons, there is nothing that he's going to do to make the Stormsword save on worse than a 4, because I will have the Regimental Enginseer healing it up. And that's a big problem, because if I have threats that he cannot deal with and cannot ignore, it's a losing matchup. That's basically how 40k generally goes. We end up playing this last one on Mission L for Luis. Mission L is Scorched Earth, Chilling Rain, and Dawn of War, and I have a pretty good win rate on this one too. It's weird how like when I win more of my games than I lose, it does mean that I tend to have pretty good win rates on. The only time I've lost this is if you watch my previous video where I played against Steven and his Tyranids at the Loaded Dice GT. This is the one where I lost because it's not the only reason, but I can pretty easily blame it on missing my 1 in 500 or losing the 1 in 500 roll where I needed to make a couple of charges. This was a mission where a couple of things are true. One, it's very important to know that a Rogel Thorn shooting everything into a unit of Bullgryn will, on average, kill 1.5. Right? If he rolls really well, a Rogel Thorn might kill 3 Bullgryn a turn. And if Bullgryn are doing an action on an objective, he has to bring guys out into the open for me to deal with. So we go ahead. We get set up. Our deployment looks fairly similar, but one of the things that's important to know about the crates is because they are 3 inches wide, it is not possible to put a crate on your side of an objective and still have a little sliver on the far side. That's part of why you can kind of see on the eastern side of this board, I have those 2 crates kind of at an angle that create like a V. That's the only way that you can set up these crates in order to give yourself something safe to stand on your side of the board. So I end up doing that there, and then I set up some safe spots for my Kasrkin and whatever to hide on the western flank of the board as well. And then we go off and we roll. So I end up being defender, but we roll and he ends up redeploying first. And crucially, he ends up putting a Rogel Dorn, or both of his Rogel Dorns. I think one of them was named Danella, and one of them was named like Donald or something. Luis can confirm in the comments, I'm sure. But he puts them both on the northwest corner behind that big ruin. And importantly, one of them is peeking out. And that's bad. That's real bad. I also asked him at this point, he's like, hey, do you want it to be possible for your Dorns to walk through on this side? Because Dorns are a little bit wider than 4. I think they're about 5 inches, meaning that if you set up a ruin within 4 inches of the wall, or at 4 inches from the wall, a Dorn can't go through. And of course, that's a natural thing. It's like, hey, I just want to make sure this is your intention. Do you want your Dorns to be able to walk through over here? And he goes, nah, and we're chilling. So anyway, we set all that up. We both do our redeploys. He does his, I do mine. I just basically redeploy Gaunt's Ghost to somewhere safe where they will not die on turn 1, which is great. And then we do another roll-off. And guys, I go first a 3rd time in a row. A couple of things happen on this one. Firstly, this image that you see on screen is what the board is like at the end of the top of turn 1. We both go tactical for this game. Now, normally, there's supposed to be a bit of a Dorn peeking out from that northwest ruin. There is not anymore. Now, the thing about this, I go ahead and roll all my shots. I do pretty well. I end up wounding Luis 7 times. Because hitting on 3s with lethal hits, because I didn't need to move, and wounding on 3s as well. And they are AP4 ignores cover. So the Dorn with a native 2-up is going to be saving on 6s. The Dorn can blank a shot, but it has to do at the time of allocation before you take the save. So he takes the 7 shots, and he discards one of them and says, I'm going to blank this one. And then he rolls his saves. He rolls 6 saves, and he rolls 3 6s. And he actually, like, that's enough to keep the Dorn alive until the last cannons fire. And then the last cannons fire, and they rip the Dorn apart. It doesn't explode, and nothing else takes any mortal wounds. But the other thing that happened is you see where all my green-based Catachan are next to that little ruin? Now, my Stormsword could not see a couple of Sentinels that were there, but I chucked a grenade at them. I hit them with some flamers and Straken's shotgun, and then I charged them, and Straken killed the rest of them. The Sentinels just died. And then I was also able to consolidate them. That's why you see all the Deathcore of Krieg in that little building. I was able to consolidate into those as well. And after all of this, I killed a Rogel Thorn and some Sentinels on turn 1 and did some chip damage elsewhere. And as you can see, I also have a bunch of Bullgryn on the center objective. They're kind of creating this wall of muscle. Haha, that's their ability name. Just across the center of the board. And he can't move. Luis can't really do much of anything on the board. And so I create the space here. I advance all of my Bullgryn because they're not going to get any turn 1 charges off no matter what. And just create a situation where I'm on 2 objectives in no man's land. I'm on my home objective. And on Luis's turn, I draw Area Denial and Cleanse. And I'm able to do that pretty easily in the middle and the east. And he draws no prisoners and secure no man's land. Now, on Luis's turn 2, he decides it is time to go to Las Vegas, baby. It's time to roll some dice and see what happens. What he does is he takes his Rapier Laser Destroyers that are hiding in the middle ruin there, and they pop up to the top floor. That means that they can see over those crates in the middle of the board, and they can all see my Stormsword. Now, of course, because I went first, my Stormsword has a 4-up invul. Then, he points his Rogaldorn out from behind the northwest ruin there, and he peeks them out so that they can see my Kasrkin. And then he also takes his Catachan, which you can see on the northeast part, and they move their way to take the eastern objective away from my Kasrkin. And he opens up, he decides we're starting with the Rapier Laser Destroyers first. They all shoot, and so it's 12 las cannons, twin linked. They all shoot, hitting on 3s, rerolling 1s. And then he goes to wound. And he ends up getting 4 wounds through. And I roll my 4-up invul saves because they are AP 3, and I'm a 2-up with a 4-up invul save. And I save 3 of them. And he rolls his last cannon shot for damage. And it does 3 damage. And that is all the damage that my Stormsword will take this entire game. Now, on turn 2, I'm effectively able to deliver the coup de grace. I draw behind enemy lines and overwhelming force. Oh, yeah, Colonel Straken and the lads charge my Kasrkin on the eastern objective. They do a little bit of damage. But at this point, I once again do not need to move my Stormsword on turn 2 when I draw behind enemy lines and overwhelming force. And what I'm able to do is a couple of things. One, Stormsword stays still, and it shoots its main gun at one of the sets of Rapier Laser Destroyers, shoots its heavy bolters at the other set of Laser Destroyers, and it shoots its las cannons at some sentinels that he had moved, and advanced, and they're a little, they're right in front of where my Bullgryn are on the eastern side of the board. And the Rapier Lasers all die. Also, the concussion splash coming through from the Stormsword's main gun does 2 mortal wounds to Ursula Creed, who's on the 2nd floor of that building. Also, the Sentinels take a bunch of damage. I think they both die to the heavy bolters. Oh no, they live on like 1 wound after all the heavy bolters go through. And then after this, I do a couple of things. One, I drop some Scions in the northeast. They help clean up the Catachan on the eastern objective. I have my Bullgryn charge the Catachan on the east. I bring in some Kasrkin on the east as well, and the Catachan end up getting wiped, including Colonel Straken. I have my Gaunt's Ghost and Callidus chill out in the 2 corners on the board. I bring the Cyclops demo vehicle on the western side of the board in a very similar way to how I was screening out Victor. The Catachan fell back from the combat they were in, and they moved behind enemy lines. The Scions were also behind enemy lines. And then my Bullgryn on the west went in, charged the Krieg, and left them at only the Deathcore Marshal. My Bullgryn in the center went in, charged his home objective, killed Ursula Creed, and did like somewhere between 7 and 9 kills to the Catachan unit that was on his home objective. So, to sum up, on turn 1, Luis lost the Rogaldorn and 2 Scout Sentinels, which he could not bring back. On turn 2, he lost both units of Rapiers, one of which he res with reinforcements. The other unit of Scout Sentinels, which he could not bring back because he could only do it once per turn, or once per phase. He lost the Catachan with Colonel Straken, which he could not bring back because he did not have the CP. He lost the Death Corps, on turn 2 to Bullgryn. The second Rogaldorn was tagged in combat. He lost Ursula Creed, and he was losing control of his home objective. And then, after I got behind enemy lines for 5 and overwhelming force for 5 by killing off Straken and the unit on the eastern objective, Luis started looking around the board. Because he didn't have a lot of things left. And everything that he did have left was the Kasrkin, which were off the board, and the Rapier Laser Destroyers, which would be coming back. And he goes, Josh, I literally can't bring any of my strategic reserves. I go, are you sure? And he goes, yeah, you got your Bullgryn on my home objective. So they're blocking out the center of my deployment zone. You've got the Scions in the northeast corner. They're blocking out that corner. You have the Catachan and the Bullgryn in the northwest corner. Then you have the Cyclops vehicle and Gaunt's Ghost blocking out the western and the southwest. You have your home objective, you have the Stormsword and the Callidus, which are blocking off the southeast corner. There is nowhere on this entire board where I can legally bring any of my reinforcements in. This game's over. And I'm like, huh. Yeah, I guess it is. So he ends up drawing his objectives, which are defend stronghold and behind enemy lines. And he goes, yep, that's it. Because he and I agree at this point. He is not going to be able to defend his home objective from the Bullgryn on my turn 3. He's not going to get anything behind enemy lines, and he doesn't choose to draw anything else. At that point, he's just like, yep, that's a good game. And so I end up drawing all my cards and just seeing what I can score. I say, yeah, I'll end up burning your home objective at some point. I'll burn one of the things in no man's land, whatever. I'm going to score maximum for this game. And guys, we have set a new personal record against our captain from CTC. This is why he is the Get Poser, the captain of the Get Posers. It was an end score of 100 to 19. Luis got more points from being battle ready, which was given to everyone in the tournament, than he did from actually playing out the last game. And that means that I won by a score, or a differential of 81 points. Now, previously, my record, I tied my record at CTC, where I had a differential of 79. Because before that, my record was set at the Phoenix There's Only War GT, where I beat a Black Templars player 100 to 21. So now we have a new personal record of 100 to 19 that we got through. And because that game ended so quickly, I ended up just hanging out. We talked some trash to different people. We got to see how other games were going. So for other context, there was Austin brought 210 something guardsmen. There was another guard player, Chris, who brought triple basilisk, I believe it was triple Dorn. And then Luis, who brought double Dorn. And yeah, so I went to go see how all the other guard players were doing, and then I just sat down to go see what the other table that had 2-0 players on it was looking like. And it's worth noting that one of them was 1 win, 1 draw, the other one was 2 wins. And I ended up watching that one through, and the player that had gotten a draw ended up winning the game. So there were so he got 2.5 out of 3, and then the other one got 2 out of 3. So it meant that I was the only 3 out of 3 player in the event, which meant that I won. And thank you to Michael and the Gatehammer guys for I got a Crew Kill Team box, which I ended up gifting to my roommate because he's been starting to play Tau too. So hopefully you'll get to see some of his games coming up in the near future as well. But with that, it was a small RTT. There was only 14 players listed as being there, so it ended up being smaller than most of the things I've gone to. But I did end up getting first at this one, getting those much-needed ITC points because we all know the better your ITC rank, the better person you are. That's not true in the slightest, but it's funny to say. So yeah, that's all of our games. Now we can talk a little bit about future plans. So what's next on the horizon for Joshi and his 40k adventure? Well, the next RTT that we are currently signed up for is the Game Ogre March RTT, which is actually the same place that I went to one of my first ever events. The first RTT that I ever won was Game Ogre almost exactly a year ago now, actually. where I was able to win that one. And a couple of the same players who I won against are going to be there as well. After that, we have the Gamers Haven RTT in April that I am signed up for out in the Riverside area. And then I am signed up for both the LA Classic GT at Odyssey Games in Pasadena. And I'm also signed up for the Palm Springs Open, which I believe is in like August. So that one's a ways away. But either way, I'm signed up for all these events in the near futures. I'll be making videos about those. I'm still trying to see if I can get some home battle reports ready for you guys at the near future. And I also ordered some Games Workshop style terrain, which will be coming in sometime over the course of April. So as soon as I get that, we will be sure to get some games in at home. But for now, that is everything. I've been Joshua Joshi Howard talking about the Get Hammer Mork Madness RTT at Squad Marks in California. We will sign off for now and make sure to see you all next time.